Awesome. Okay. Well, I'm hoping that the other agencies will join us soon. If not, uh,
I think we have everybody.
okay.
Savvy Health confirmed in the chat. I just added someone from Transitions Mental Health. So I added the initials. I think we have everyone.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
All right, so we will get started again. Thank you so much for your patience and understanding. I promise we will get you out of here at by 11:30 as promised. This is our annual pre-application workshop. For many of you, this will be a refresher. For some of you, this will all be new. Please know that this is being recorded, so it will be posted on our website and you can always refer back to it. We will email you the slides. And without further ado, we'll proceed. So again, because this is a mandatory pre-application workshop, we want to make sure that your attendance is documented, and we're documenting it by having you put your initials into the Google Doc. We figured that was easier than going through agency by agency who signed up ahead of time to make sure that you're here. And if you did not sign up ahead of time, but you are here today and would like your attendance counted, there's also an opportunity for you to add that at the very bottom of that Google Doc. If you're having trouble with the Google Doc, please let us know in the chat, and either Alicia or I will will help you with that. All right, next slide, please. So what to expect today? We'll go over the funding criteria for CDBG, which most of you are aware of because you read the notice of funding availability, and that's included in that document. But just in case, we'll just go over it very briefly. We'll go through the application process. If you're not familiar with it, this will be helpful. And then the post-award requirements, which we believe are very helpful, because it's not enough for you to know what the application process is like. You also need to be aware of what's going to be expected of you if you are selected for funding. And we just want to make sure that we're as transparent as we can be about those requirements, because agencies that are not familiar with CDBG sometimes are a bit surprised at the amount of work that comes with managing CDBG funding. Next slide, please. So the CDBG national objectives, there are three main objectives when it comes to qualifying an eligible activity or project. The project must serve one of three purposes. One, to benefit primarily low to moderate income people. The other one's to aid in the prevention or elimination of slums and blight. And the third one is to meet particular urgent needs that it pose serious and immediate threat to the health and or welfare of the community. Now, there are a few, because the CDBG has to primarily serve low to moderate income people or aid in the prevention of elimination of slums or blight or help with urgent matters, we have to document all that. We have to either document people's income or document the low to moderate income area. But there are such things as presumed benefit, and those are individuals or groups of people that fall under certain categories, and those are listed on the screen, and they fall under what's called presumed benefit. That means that regardless of income, regardless of the areas they live in, they automatically qualify to receive CDBG funding. Next slide, please. So along with the federal government's criteria under CDBG, the city annually adopts priorities that it also uses to make sure that the funding is being used to serve the biggest needs. And on your screen, you'll see that the biggest needs continue to be the homelessness, addressing critical need, assisting at-risk youth, the elderly, and the underserved, as well as expanding educational development opportunities, provide affordable housing, and revitalize existing neighborhoods. Now, keep in mind that the numbers on the left-hand side are only for referencing. There doesn't mean that affordable housing isn't considered as high as assisting people, who have critical needs or the elderly. There, it's just our ability, our way of looking at being able to more easily point out the funding priorities. Also, just so you know, for those who are applying for public services, priorities 1 and 2 will only be considered for CDBG public service. Why is that? Simply put, based on the limitations under public services, those top two, the number 1 and 2 are the priorities that best fall under that category. Under capital, usually you're better able to serve priorities 3 and 4 with capital funding versus priorities 1 and 2. Next slide, please. So also on your screen, you'll see the expected available funding. Now we're basing our anticipated entitlement amount based on what we received for this fiscal year. So what we're anticipating to have for public services is about $223,000. For capital, we're anticipating having a little less than $1 million. Next slide, please. So moving on to additional criteria that our Block Grants Advisory Committee will use when vetting the projects that are presented to them. As I mentioned, priorities 1 and 2 will only be considered for CDBG public services. CDBG funded services must target all CDBG funded services must be targeted at for Santa Maria residents only. So your office could be somewhere else. It doesn't necessarily have to be in Santa Maria. However, the people you're serving, the area you're serving with CDBG funds from the city of Santa Maria have to stay in the city of Santa Maria. Now, why is that? Because a lot of the agencies here today also receive funding from the county of Santa Barbara, from other cities that are also CDBG. And so because that money is coming to us, we have to keep it in-house. Just like if you received funding, let's say from the county of Santa Barbara, that funding could serve the unincorporated areas of the county. So the CDBG funding has to be that's just part of the requirement from HUD that if the city's obtaining that funding, the funding has to stay within the city and help the residents within that city receiving that funding. Agencies must not provide a duplicative service. So because we're so limited in the amount of money we have, and we on an annual basis get way more applications than we have money for, we make sure that we try to not duplicate services. So if we have 2 agencies that are providing exactly the same service, more than likely that will be taken into consideration, and more than likely only one of those 2 agencies will receive the funding. Agencies must demonstrate that funding is sought from a variety of sources. What that means is CDBG should not be your be all end all. It should not be something that's meant to sustain your agency. It's meant to augment the services that you're providing to the city. Agencies should have adequate administrative capacity to manage CDBG funds. For those who manage CDBG funds on an annual basis, you know that it can be administratively burdensome at times, depending on how the money is being used. So just please know that there will be a level of administrative burden that will be imposed on the agency to manage the CDBG funding. Priority will be given to agencies that have been in existence and have effectively provided services for at least 3 years. That is a local criteria that was put in place because, again, going back to the funds and how the funds need to be administered, and then also making sure that it's not sustaining an agency. The CDBG funds are augmenting an agency. The city has found that the funding is best utilized when an agency is already established and has been able to have some practice in serving the community and also managing funding such as CDBG. Agencies should provide services that reduce city or other government costs. So again, because the city is very generous and provides this funding to the nonprofits instead of keeping most of the funding for itself, it would like to be able to partner with the agencies so that in turn, there are services that the city doesn't have to offer because nonprofits are being able to offer it. And obviously the nonprofits being this is what you do day in and day out, you do a much better job than we would ever be able to do by trying to do it ourselves. And agencies should provide an efficient level of service at the least cost possible. So of course, that's, I think, something we all strive for. Next slide, please. So for capital projects, so we just talked about public services. Now, public services are 15% of our CDBG funding. The capital projects are the 65% of our CDBG funding. And for capital projects, we just went through our project proposal process, and that was presented to City Council on Tuesday. And on Tuesday, City Council, in a nutshell, council felt that all of the proposals that were presented to them are important and they would like to see them move forward and then let the committee figure out the funding that should go to each agency. So here on your screen, you see the 6 project proposals that we received from outside agencies. Next slide, please. Oh, I should add that if you did not submit a proposal, you will not be able to apply for capital funds for this upcoming fiscal year. So public services, you did not have to submit a proposal. I just want to reassure you, if you're applying for public services, no proposal was needed. But if you're applying for capital, only the 6 that you see on the screen will be eligible to move forward to apply for funding, and that application is due December 7th. Sorry, next slide. So moving on, continuing on with capital projects. For capital project applications, 3 bids are required. Now, I know right now obtaining 3 bids is very difficult. That's okay. At the end of the day, as long as you can show us that you did everything you did to obtain 3 bids, we will take that into consideration. What we're finding is that our agencies are only able to get 1 bid, but they have a lot of documentation showing that they called, they emailed, they gave us a list of the different contractors they reached out to, and in the end, if all you've got is 1, then that's all you have. But as long as there's documentation that you did your due diligence, then we will definitely take that into consideration. So I don't want anybody thinking that they're going to be in trouble or they're not going to qualify for funding if they only have 1 bid. But obviously we strive for 3 bids as anyone would if they're trying to move forward with a capital project. And capital and sorry, we don't have any city capital projects, so we don't have to worry about that last bullet point. So additional criteria, and again, this is just for capital projects. Project readiness, how quickly can the project start? So of course, we don't want money just sitting there. We definitely, and HUD definitely doesn't want us to allocate the funds and then just have that money sit there for another year until you're shovel ready. So we do ask that if you are applying for funding, that once we provide you the funding, which is as of July 1st of 2023, you're ready to go within 90 days. The financial feasibility, how realistic is the budget that's presented and the ability of the project or program to operate sufficiently based on that budget. Cost efficiency, is the budget efficient? Are we including reasonable costs? So all of that will be taken into consideration. And then of course, the administrative capacity, the ability of the project team to deliver the project in the time allotted, the time projected, and also meet the requirements that come with this grant funding. Next slide, please. And two more things to be aware of if you are applying for capital projects. Davis-Bacon, which is our prevailing wage, is triggered with the exception of our minor home repair. But all the other capital projects that are thinking of applying for funding do trigger prevailing wage. Also, Section 3 requirement that applies to CDBG capital projects that are over 200,000. And again, and that's whether the project is fully or partially funded with CDBG. And then per CDBG, the contractor and subcontractor must abide by CDBG Section 3 requirements. Now, what that means is that economic opportunities generated by using CDBG should be made available to low and very low income persons, particularly those who receive federal financial assistance for housing. So in a nutshell, what we do is we'll have to get, and again, this is if the project's over $200,000, we will need to have every single person working on that job site, we will need them to sign a form that tells us whether they meet the Section 3 requirements. And then we will go through that. And then there are percentages that are ideal for us to meet per HUD's guidelines. And we can definitely go over that with those that receive the funding when the time comes. So we will walk you through all of that. It's not as scary as it sounds, but it is a process and something that we want you to be aware of. Next slide, please. Okay, so application process instructions. Applications must be submitted through Zoom Grants by 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, December 7th. That's for both public services and capital. Submit a separate application for each project and program. For public services, an agency can submit up to 2 applications for separate programs. Now, this is fairly new. We allowed this last year and we're allowing that again this year. So if you're an agency, but you have 2 separate programs and you want to apply for those programs under public services, you definitely can do that, but no more than 2. Also, if let's say you're an agency that's applying for public services and capital, you need to submit an 2 separate applications, one for capital, one for public services. Please read all application instructions and Zoom Grants thoroughly. Additional instructions and resource materials can be accessed under the Library tab under our website, as well as Zoom Grants. And if you submit an application before the deadline, you can still make changes to your application up until the last day. All changes made to your application after submittal, but before the application deadline, will automatically be saved. So there's no need to resubmit. Now, we want to stress this because you don't need to wait until the last minute to submit your application. What we would hate to have happen is that you're still working on it, making changes, and you're like, oh, I'll just submit, on the very last day. And then something happens on the very last day and you're unable to submit on time, and we will not be accepting late applications. So if that application is not in there by 11:59 on Wednesday, December 7th, it will not be accepted. So I just want to stress that you can always submit an application before the deadline, and you can always go back in and make any adjustments to that application up until the last day of the application deadline. Any questions so far before I pass it on to Alicia?
There's a couple questions in the chat. The first one is from Linda Ray. It says, if we're an established agency who has been providing services for many years in Santa Maria, but have a new program, can we still apply for that program? It has not been in Santa Maria for 3 years, but we have provided it elsewhere for a longer period of time.
Hi, Linda. That's a great question. Yes, you are still more than welcome to apply. Just understand that that is one of the things that the Block Grants Advisory Committee looks at. So they might have a few more questions about the number of people served, how you're going to, they want to see that you have a plan in place to ensure that goals are going to be met with the CDBG funding. But yes, you are still welcome to apply. It's just the criteria that the Block Grants Advisory Committee looks at to weigh, the one application over another.
Okay, so the program itself isn't required to have been in Santa Maria for 3 years, as long as we've been providing services there as an agency.
Correct. Like it's just they're going to want to know that there's some sort of, it's not just like a brand new startup program and you're just going to use CDBG funds to try it out and see what happens. They want, because again, the funds are meant to augment an existing program. It's not necessarily meant to sustain your program. That makes sense?
Yeah, I understand.
Okay.
And there was also a question, are they both due on December 7th? Yes, the public service and capital applications are both due on Wednesday, December 7th. Also, just a reminder, as Rosie stated earlier, in order to submit a capital project application, you must have submitted a capital project proposal on September 21st, as those went to City Council for review this week. How do we access Zoom grants? The NOFA that was sent out, or the link to the NOFA that was sent out, there's a link to our City of Santa Maria webpage, and that will have a link to the Zoom application. I can also send that out along with the follow-up email after this meeting.
Great questions. And then Aaron, I did I did respond in the chat, but Aaron asked if the 3 years is not a requirement, correct? Correct. It's not a requirement. It's just a criteria, an additional criteria that the Block Grants Advisory Committee uses, being that we get so many different applications, and there's just additional criteria that has been created throughout the years to try and figure out what the best use of funding is for that upcoming fiscal year.
And if no one has questions for Rosie, I'll go ahead and get started with the actual applications. Feel free to raise your hand or add something in the chat if you need me to clarify anything, but I'll go ahead and get started with my section. So the CDBG application questions tab, the program information just pertains to information based on the proposed Santa Maria program or project. So when you define units of service, you'll be specific to the Santa Maria program only, and you'll describe your goals and measures for that program. Question number 10 is one that a lot of applicants have issues with, so we just wanted to go into a little bit more. Question 10, it's asking for the overall number of Santa Maria persons or households that the agency anticipates to serve by the proposed program. So you only need to report one. So if you're going with persons, you'll put the overall number that will be served by the Santa Maria program. So this is not just what you're going to serve with CDBG, this is the overall Santa Maria program. And later, this number will be used to calculate the number of persons or households served or anticipated to be served with the use of CDBG funding. And we'll go into that on the next slide. Question 11, you'll define your agency's unit of service. So I have an example there. A unit of service is defined as one meal. It could be one counseling hour, it could be one bed night. It just depends on what type of service your agency is providing. But we just need to know the definition of what your unit of service is. So question 11 is a two-part question. B is asking an estimate of how many units of service one person will receive. So in the example here, I have one person equals 20 units of service. So it translates to one person equals approximately 20 meals. And there's also another example underneath the question as well. So the way we'll interpret this is overall, the proposed Santa Maria program will serve 300 unduplicated persons based on what was entered in question 10, with approximately 6,000 meals. And the way we get that is 300 persons times 20 meals, because the agency stated that one person receives approximately 20 meals. So this is just an estimate as to your goals for the fiscal year. Does anyone have any questions on this slide before I move forward? Or Rosie, is there anything you would like to add?
No, you explained it really well, Alicia. Yeah, I think the big take, this one always seems to throw off our agencies. We've tried to do what we can in Zoom grants to make it so that the formula kind of does the work for you. So hopefully that will help. But if you have any questions about it along the way as you fill out your application, just give us a call. We're happy to go over it again. That's not an issue. That's why we encourage you to start working on the application early. It's easier for us to answer all of your questions when you work on the application earlier. It's going to be really hard for us to answer the question on December 7th, because it's just, yeah, the closer it gets to the deadline, the harder it is to get back to you. Sylvia, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so I I just want clarification, because this one always catches us, and I know that Jasmine from our quality assurance is on here as well. So you're asking for not the portion that CDBG pays, like for example, out of our shelter system, it costs us $1 million a year to operate, and we're asking for a fraction of that, but you're asking for the data on the actual program outcomes itself for the overall program, not the CDBG portion, correct?
So we'll ask you yes, but we basically ask you the question in two different ways. So well, let me go back. So we used to ask you both questions, but then that was throwing everybody off. So now what we've done in Zoom grants is we ask you so that's why number 10 says, what is the total number of unduplicated persons or households to be served overall by the proposed Santa Maria program project? And then the formula in Zoom grants will do the math for you and give us the number. So basically it'll take whatever you're asking for in CDBG and divide that up by your overall project's amount, and then give us the number of people served out of that. So under CDBG. So we're kind of trying to simplify it. So but we are very specific about, if we're asking you for your entire proposed program or project budget or number of people served, it'll say overall. But if we want you to be specific, we'll say CDBG, just CDBG. So does that answer? We're trying to have Zoom grants do most of the work for you. Does that
Okay.
help?
It,
No?
it helps a little bit, but I will make sure I ask my question before December 1st for sure.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure.
Emily, you have your hand up.
I do. I think you answered in the chat, but I was wondering because we don't have tangible like meals or beds per se, but what we do at the Boys and Girls Club is we provide a service. So would the units actually translate in hours of service?
Yeah, we have some where they offer counseling hours. So we've had that in the past where you can put one person equals 10 hours of counseling sessions. So it just depends on your agency, but yes, hours should be fine.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And we had another question from Karen. Karen asked, what's the maximum amount that you can apply for? Under public services, we have a minimum of 15,000 that we will give to an agency. That's the minimum. And the maximum right now that we have is 10% of our public service set aside. So right now, our public service set aside, what we anticipate is about 223,000, which means that approximately 22,000 is the most you'll be able to get under public services. And the reason we have minimums and maximums is because the minimum, anything, if we give an agency anything less than 15,000, it's not, I know this sounds really crazy because it's a lot of money, but it's not worth anybody's time to give anybody less than 15,000. And if we don't put a cap on how much we give, then we could technically just fund one project, one public service. So we're trying to find that happy medium where we're trying to serve as many agencies as possible, but at the same time, not shortchange the agencies to the point where it's almost like it's going to cost more money just to administer the grant than it is for you to just, than the amount of money you're getting. So that's our happy medium, is that's why we have that minimum and maximum.
And you have a question?
It's not really a question, it's more of a statement and I understand what y'all are trying to do by simplifying the language and we appreciate that. But I think I understand where Sylvia's head is at too. For those of us who've been doing y'all's reports for a lot of years, we get stuck on the word overall because we do have such broad programs that we offer within the city of Santa Maria. But so when I hear the word overall, to me, that means you want to know everything that we're doing, but then we're also reporting on just the individual people that we're serving only with CDBG funds. So to me, overall is all the money that we get to do the work, including CDBG funding, plus just the individuals, the small number of people that we're able to serve with CDBG funding. So I didn't know that the program was actually doing the math for us behind the scenes. So that's an interesting thing to learn. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I'll move on to the next slide. We have 10 minutes scheduled, so we'll go through the next slides slightly quick. But this is just an explanation of the tables tab. So for example, there's an applications tab, program budget, required documents, and there's also a tables tab, which we added last year. So you'll report whether you're reporting households or individuals. So you just indicate one, and here's an example at the bottom. You'll report what you're requesting for the CDBG portion of the budget. And then you'll also add your annual budget for the Santa Maria program. And this number must match the number that you're reporting in the budget tab. And then it will automatically calculate the percent of CDBG investment. So that's the 20,000 divided by 500,000. So CDBG makes up about 4% of your overall annual Santa Maria program budget. And then it'll take the overall annual number of persons and households that are served by the Santa Maria program. So that's the number that you reported in question 10 in the previous slide. And it'll multiply it by the percent of CDBG investment. So the numbers in black are the numbers that will be automatically populated, and the blue font is what you'll be entering. And this slide here will be helpful when you're working through that tables tab. But again, if you have questions while you're entering the numbers, or if it doesn't look right to you, you can always contact us for clarification or to kind of walk you through the process. So the next slide, questions 18 through 21, this is your agency information. So it's not just based on the proposed program, it'll include background information on the applicant. So if you're submitting multiple applications, such as a public service and a capital, this part should remain the same. For CDBG capital development projects, your project information, you'll have questions 24 and 25. So at the beginning of your application, there should be a branching question. And if you select capital development, then these questions should be available to you. And this pertains to information on the proposed project, which will include the problem, a needs statement, project description, schedule, and phasing if needed. The CDBG Budget tab, so this is for the proposed program and project only, not the entire agency budget. Column A is total prior year's budget for the proposed program and project. Column B is the total annual budget for the proposed program project. And column C will be your CDBG portion, what you're requesting. And just a reminder, the budgeted amount should be for the Santa Maria program only. If you're applying for capital projects, please note that federal labor standards and Davis-Bacon prevailing wages may apply, and that will greatly impact your budget. So just make sure that that's accounted for when you're reporting those numbers. So this is just an example of what the budget tab will look like. Column A, total prior year. Column B, total annual for the proposed, and column C, CDBG portion. So that will be your revenue section. And here's your expenses section. So when you're working on the CDBG portion of the budget, you'll put in what your 3 requested line items would be. So if you're only requesting salaries, then you would put, if you're requesting 20,000 for salaries, you would put 20,000 there. If you'd like to request 5,000 for salaries and 15 for direct assistance, then you would just break it down here. And if there's any question on whether your request is eligible or not, you can always reach out to city staff. For technical assistance, if there's any technical questions or any questions related to the Zoom grant system, you can email questions@zoomgrants.com or call the number listed on your screen. But if you have any questions related to the content or need clarification on an item in the grant application, you can contact us via email or our our work group extension is listed there below. If any application is determined to be incomplete, it'll be reviewed by the Block Grants Advisory Committee to determine whether it will be accepted or rejected. So if we have any question, we'll reach out to you directly. And what to expect if a grant is awarded. So it's important to know that there's a lot of post-award requirements set in place regarding the management and administration of this grant, such as submitting requests for payments with the required backup documentation, submitting client intake forms, reporting demographics on a quarterly basis, and an annual final report, which will be an overview of what the agency did with the funding. We also do desk monitorings for all subrecipients, and we conduct on-site monitorings for a select amount. And record keeping is crucial with CDBG funding. If you have any, if you'd like to learn more about our process, we have our subrecipient training workshop and orientation video on the CDBG webpage for additional information. And I'm gonna hand the meeting over to Rosie, but does anyone have any questions? Alejandra?
Hi, Alicia. Yeah. Can you please send us the training videos with your follow-up email?
Yes, of course. I'll
Thank
include
you.
that in the email.
Perfect. Thanks.
No problem.
All right, we have a few more slides. I promised you to get out of here by 11:30. It's 11:29. I've got a minute to go through 3 slides. Okay, so on your screen, you'll see if a grant is awarded, invoices must be supported with detailed backup documentation. Of course, if you're gonna charge salaries, we are gonna need time cards and payroll to show those costs and time spent on CDBG related activities. If you're going to apply for occupancy, general purchases, then we also will need backup documentation. Next slide. And key dates. On your screen, you'll see, again, application deadline December 7th by 11:59 p.m. Then you'll see also on your screen, the site visits will be the week of January 17th. Our deliberations will take place the 13th and 16th of February. Then there'll be a 30-day public review, and then the Block Grants Advisory Committee recommendations will go before the City Council on April 4th for a public hearing. And then that will then be reviewed again, and then the final approval will go back to Council on May 2nd. Next slide, please. And if you have any questions, please give Alicia or me or myself a call. Again, thank you so much. I am so sorry for the technical difficulties at the very start. But again, please feel free to always reach out to us. We are more than happy to go over any of this again with you. There's no question that you can ask too many times or get clarification on if it means getting you the information you need to be able to efficiently, effectively submit an application. So please always feel free to give us a call. We're always happy to hear from you. Thank you so much for everything you do. Thank you for bearing with us, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.